Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the September Successful Gardener class. And Christina wrote this for me. We are recording this class, so please mute your line during the presentation. I'm Susan Varley, and I'm one of the Union County Extension Master Gardeners. We host the Successful Gardener series at 7 p.m. on the first Thursday of every month, except for December. Next month, we'll be discussing harvesting of other things like flowers and fruit, tomatoes, that kind of thing. Make sure to register at our website, or for a full calendar, you can go to the website that Christina is putting in the chats.
Just put it in there.
Thank you.
All the links are there.
We will add the links to the chat box. I told you someone else wrote it. Our website is full of great info for you, for information about our programs, upcoming events, gardening info, especially important info about how to become a master gardener. You don't have to be an expert to start training. Again, more information will be in the chat box. We're really happy for anybody to join the Master Gardeners with the class and everything. We would be very grateful to have you. Tonight, Abby Artemesia is with the Wander School will join us to talk about herbs, growing and using and preserving them. Abby is a botanist, herbalist, forager, and founder of the Wander School, a nonprofit making herbs and botanical education accessible to underserved communities. She lives on the edge of the Pisgah National Forest in Appalachian, North Carolina, where she forages and wildcrafts her food and medicine and teaches wildcrafted herb school. She is the author of The Herbal Handbook for Homesteaders and the Wild Forage Life Cookbook, and the host of the Wander, Forage, and Wildcraft podcast. You can find these and more at www.thewanderschool.com. Again, hopefully will be in the chat box. If you have questions, if you could add them to the chat box, we will do them at the end of the hour. We're recording the program, and it will be available on YouTube, and we will send a link to all the registers when we have it out there. And we'll also post it on the Facebook page. Again, we're very happy to have you here, and Abby, take it away.
Thanks so much. Christina, if you want, I can see the chat. I could try and answer questions if they seem applicable or we have time during.
However you would like to do it.
Okay, cool. But I might need your help, because if I start to answer a question, I might get off track. So
I will do this. How about that? Can you see me?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, then yeah.
That's great. And maybe I can't really see unless I scroll up, which I guess is okay. But let me know if we're getting short on time.
And I'll just open my big mouth. How about that?
Okay. Great. Well, hello and welcome to everyone. Thanks so much for being here. Susan just said pretty much everything about what I do, so I don't need to say much more. But this is me in my apothecary and my business and my book, which Susan mentioned. And it's the Herbal Handbook for Homesteaders, Farmed and Foraged Herbal Remedies and Recipes. So it is full of awesomeness, and it tells how to grow the plants, how to forage them, how to forage sustainably. And it has lots of recipes for all kinds of different medicines you can make and some food that you can make as well. So including some of the things we're going to talk about today and some of the plants too. And if you look at the Wander School website, you can find it, and I'll have a link at the end. And I will send you a signed copy for you or whomever you want. So you grew it, now what? Okay, so right here we have a plant that probably most of you know, basil, one of my favorite things to eat. And it's a pretty good segue because there was some talk by a couple of folks about pesto. So that's another great way to preserve the harvest. Okay, so first we could talk about just a couple harvesting tips if you're new to herb growing. and we can talk about various ways to dry herbs, the different ways to store them, and multiple ways to preserve them. And I encourage y'all to type in the chat box or wait till the end and speak up about your ideas on these things too, because I'm sure that plenty of you, just like the pesto comments, have your own amazing experience to add to this conversation. Okay, so these are just some of the things we're going to talk about today. There's an example of drying herbs up in the left-hand corner here, and this beautiful basket of harvested herbs. There's some cool wild herbs in here. It looks like some Japanese knotweed, which I love harvesting wild invasive. So we're talking about herbs from the garden, but I teach a lot about foraging, and a lot of times some of these will grow in your yard or volunteer in your garden, and some of them tend to be the bane of gardeners' existences. So I like to encourage folks, and you especially, to harvest them and see what you can make out of them. And we have some fun things that you can make with herbs over here. So here's some tips for harvesting. This is not necessarily herbs right here, but gives you a good idea and was a good picture. I like to include lots of pictures so that I'm not reading off the screen and y'all aren't getting bored. But if you're new to gardening, or you're new to herbs, or you're new to gardening specific herbs, it's really good to research those herbs. And of course, the master gardeners are a really good place to do that, and a great resource. Sorry, I'm going to sneeze. No, maybe not. Really great resource for if you have questions on the specific herbs. And there are different ways we can harvest each herb and the different parts of the herbs that will promote regrowth. And a lot of times that's what we want to do so that they keep coming back during the different parts of the year. So for example, with basil, I like to just harvest the top. So the top 4 to 6 leaves or so, and just pinch those right under what is called the node, so where the leaf joins the stem. And there are specialized cells in there. If you want to get super nerdy about it, they're called meristematic cells, and they promote regrowth. So I do have a degree in botany. I'm a botanist, and so I know some of that nerdy stuff. So you don't have to remember those words, but just know that there are certain ways that you can harvest each part of the plant and each separate plant that will help them to continue to grow, so that potentially you can harvest them multiple times of the year, which is really fun. So, and then think about when you're harvesting the plants. So I talk about this a lot with foraging, but it's great if you're an herb gardener as well. So we always want to harvest when the most vitality is in that part of the plant. So like with basil, let's say, you want to harvest that whenever the leaves are up and when they look good. So obviously before the frost, and we don't want to harvest leaves that are really bug eaten. If you're not, making like something that you want to look really pretty, then if they're a little bug eaten, it's totally fine. And I don't use chemicals in my garden, so things do get bug eaten or often deer eaten, unfortunately. But yeah, we want to think about when the most vitality is in each part of the plant. So, and for roots, I harvest some roots. So the best time for roots is in the spring or the fall, like the spring before the leaf growth is starting to come out, and in the fall after the leaves have died back. So I see that there's a question here. Is it better to harvest in the morning or evening? I mean, part of me says whenever you can. Some of us don't have the luxury of choosing, but I would say preferably in the morning if you can. I feel like it's going to have the most energy in the plant during that time, but after the morning dew has dried, so some of you may not have to worry about that one where you are. It may just be really dry a lot of the time. But I am here in Western North Carolina in the rainforest, so it stays really wet here, and that's another good point. Like, we want to try not to harvest when things are wet, because they won't preserve well, and we could potentially be passing on some disease to the plant. So I prefer morning, but evening is okay after the day has kind of cooled off a little bit. We don't want to harvest in the middle of the day if we can help it, because everything's going to be hot and a little bit wilted. That's a really good question. Okay, so, and then of course, if you're harvesting flowers or fruit, just whenever they're out and they look good. Okay, so garden log, I think this is an awesome idea for anyone. I also promote foraging logs as well, which are a little bit different than garden logs, but just something so that we can remember what we're growing exactly. So the specific species, and if it's a variety or a cultivar, where you got the seeds from. That's really important, obviously, because if they grew well, you want to know where they came from. Or if they didn't germinate, that's important too. Maybe you don't want to grow from them again. Whoops. And then the quantity you got in your harvest, and it's not like you have to weigh this, but just maybe eyeball it. Like, I got a gallon bag of this. And then the dates of harvest. So you know the next year, like, I started harvesting around this date and I was able to harvest this long, and that can be really helpful. Okay, so drying techniques. This is really important, and please share any drying techniques that I don't mention that you have, or any comments that you have about these techniques. There are so many, and I'm not going to cover all of them. So here's some cool pictures of some drying techniques. So air drying, I feel like this is the easiest, but it can also be the longest. So you have to be patient, and you need a very particular environment. So a lot of times where I am, here in Western North Carolina, this time of year, it is hard to air dry things, because it's just too wet. There's too much humidity in the air. So you need a dry environment and you need good air circulation. And so sometimes that can mean turning a fan on and pointing it towards your drying herbs. You could just lay your herbs out on a table. You want to make sure they're spread out really well. As long as they're getting good air circulation, you probably want to go in, if they are on a tabletop, and just turn them over every, once a week or every few days or so, to make sure that all the surfaces get dry. A lot of times I dry things in baskets. So, like, especially the kind of baskets that you get like apples or peaches in, or go apple or peach picking with, that have pretty big holes in them. So again, there's lots of air circulation. You can do this on screens pretty simply. Some people will do it outside with just like cinder blocks or bricks, and then put a clean window screen on top of them, and then you can stack them and have multiple screens going at once. You can hang things. So you could get a sheet and attach it to your ceiling. And again, as long as you have good air circulation, but you can't forget about them, because then they'll get dusty and gross. And you can kind of like bounce them around a little bit up and down to help with that air circulation. And it is also nice because it helps to catch the seeds. So like this picture here on the left, if you have any seeds or like loose leaves, they're probably going to fall on the floor. so you have to keep more of an eye on them. But if you have a sheet, everything will just fall into that sheet. You could also just put a sheet underneath your hanging herbs, or use a paper bag, and you could, like, now I don't remember what that note was about, in or out, but um, you could just put your herbs inside of a bag, or I think that note was about you could put a bag underneath them to catch anything that falls. You could also use racks, like a clothes drying rack, and hang bundles of herbs from that. You want to make sure your bundles are about as big as they are in this picture, so like maybe a handful or so. I wrap mine with a loose rubber band. I talk about this in my book, but something cool I've learned over the years is I will hang a line in my apothecary or wherever I'm drying herbs, and just like some kind of maybe nylon cord or paracord or twine, and hang that from like some eyelet screws, and what do they call those, eye screws, from the ceiling, and then bundle your herbs with a loose rubber band and take a paper clip, and I just slightly unbend it so it's like an S shape, and then I put the bottom of the S through that loop through one band, and the top loop S over my cord. And then you can have a bunch of those bundles just hanging inside. You could also hang them outside if you have a dry spot, like in a barn or on a porch or something like that. So there's lots of options for drying. And I see a question here. See a couple of questions. Okay, what about air temperature? I have a garage that is empty but warm, especially during summer. I think that would be fine, and that's a great question we'll talk about in a little bit here. So just remind me if I forget about the temperature specifically. But I would say a garage is okay as long as it doesn't get too hot and stays dry. So those are the things. You really want a pretty consistent air temperature. And then when hanging herbs, I wash them and leave them to dry on a table for 24 hours before I hang them. Can that cause any fungal growth or mold? That's a great question. So I usually do not wash my herbs. I feel like they're usually not dirty, and I try to pick them from places where they don't get dirty. Now, of course, if it has just rained and the soil splatters up on the bottom of your plants, then it's kind of hard to avoid. But yeah, I do feel like it could introduce fungal growth. If it's really dry where you are, then it might not be a problem. So if you haven't noticed anything growing on them, then it's probably fine. But I would be a little bit concerned about that. And maybe you could just try to kind of wipe any soil off of them with just a damp cloth, or like a little paintbrush that you use just for that. That might be a good idea. Now, if you're drying something like roots, then yeah, we need to wash them, or at least brush them off really good with like a clean toothbrush. But roots need more drying anyway. Usually they're going to need a little bit of heat to dry them, but great question. Okay, speaking of which, drying and heat. So here is, it looks like an old Excalibur dehydrator, just because I haven't seen a white one in a while. But I do have an Excalibur and I love it. It is a big investment, but it's definitely paid for itself over and over. And these aren't herbs, but you can dry all kinds of things in them, make jerky, and I love them because they have really good air circulation, which I didn't put that on the slide, but it is really important. I've gotten some cheap dehydrators like from the thrift store before, and the air circulation wasn't really good, and the stuff in there molded. So if you were just doing like leaves of herbs, it probably wouldn't be a big deal. But for some thicker things like roots or jerky or something, it might not be enough air circulation. And you can get different sizes of Excaliburs, and of course, there's a whole lot of different dehydrators. I've got dehumidifiers on the brain because I have thrown them all the time in my house. Um, but yeah, if you get the nicer Excaliburs, they not only have a setting for temperature, where you can choose which temperature, which is really nice, but they also have a setting for a timer so that you can go and leave the house or go to bed and not have to worry about that they're going to be on too long and get too dry. So yeah, lots of options here. You put things out on screens in the sun. Oh, I don't know why it keeps doing that. Sorry, let's see. Can I get back? Uh-oh. Doesn't want to go back. There we go. So you can build your own solar dehydrator, and there are lots of different plans you can find for those online. Sometimes you can even find free plans. And this is a kind of controversial one that I have used before a little bit and know friends who really swear by it, but you can dry things in your car. And so again, you would want to do this with something that's not super wet. And the tricky thing with drying things in cars is that it can get very, very hot in there. So especially if it's a hot day. And so you would want to probably crack your windows and then not do it on a wet day. But yeah, here's a good story. I was foraging, I was in Maine a year ago, and there are wild rugosa roses that grow all over the place up there, and they have the hugest rose hips, and that is amazing for an herbalist. And they grow all over the coast and the beaches. And so I harvested a bunch, and we were renting a car. And so I just had these like leftover LaCroix cardboard boxes, and I cut them in half and I put the rose hips in there to dry. And then unfortunately a hurricane came through. So there was no sun, and my rose hips mostly rotted, and it was very sad. But you can get the other extreme of that where it gets really hot and really sunny, and then especially if you're drying things like mints need a very consistent temperature, and especially not too hot or they'll brown. And then it's just not very high quality herbs at that point. So, but yeah, some people swear by it and even make special like screens and shelves for their car. And some people are traveling and dry things while they're traveling. So lots of options. If anybody else dries things another way, please chip in here and give us your experience. Okay, so here's storage options. This is a beautiful apothecary setup right here. I will tell you, mine is not this beautiful. My labels and jars are very mismatched, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So do whatever works best for you. That is my advice. But speaking of which, jars. So here are some things to think about if you are going to use jars for your apothecary. So are you going to use glass jars or plastic jars? My preference is glass jars because they're not porous, and I feel like they preserve things the longest. You can also find them in different colors, and you can often find them as hand-me-downs. A lot of times are reused jars. However, I will say, like, think about what was in them before. So if you're reusing pickle jars or salsa jars, something like that that has a very strong smell, you really want to wash them really well and then leave them open and make sure, one, that they dry super well, and two, that they you give them plenty of time for that smell to wear off, because you don't want your mint to smell like pickles. Unless you do. I mean, maybe you like that sort of thing. But anyway, so you can a lot of times just ask your neighbors for jars, get them for free, talk to your local restaurants. Unfortunately, a lot of times restaurants don't have glass jars anymore, so that's a bummer. But sometimes if you go to some restaurants, they do have like the glass gallon pickle jars. And if you're going to be growing a lot of herbs, like, I don't know about y'all, but my lemon balm is insane. And I just harvest it and harvest it and harvest it. And it seems like I never have enough storage for it. So things like that are really nice. And oftentimes people want to get rid of their jars. But you have to think about, especially when you're thinking about what size jars, what your storage space is going to be like. So Pat asked, if glass, what about light affecting your dried herbs? That's a really good question. So you can see in this picture that these herbs are stored in a windowsill. That would not be my preference unless you have a thicker curtain than this, or it's on a side of the house that really doesn't get direct sun. I wouldn't worry so much about the window. I'd worry about the amount of sun it gets. So, yeah, they don't need to be stored completely in the dark, but you definitely don't want direct sunlight on them, because they will turn brown and get old and crunchy very quickly, and we don't want that, especially not after all of our hard work. So we also want to think about what size. I have all different sizes of jars, from like pretty small, maybe like half pint size, all the way up to gallons. And what I do is I will intersperse those different size jars, except for the gallon jars. I keep those on separate shelves with just gallon jars, because it's too hard to do the shelving to mix those up with the little bitty jars. And then there's like all kinds of different ways you can organize yours too. So probably most of you are going to want to organize them alphabetically by their English name, and that's fine. Mine are organized by their botanical names. But that's because I'm a botanist and an herbalist, and I know all those, and I feel like it helps my students to learn them. But I do also have a lot about that, go deeper into depth in my book. So if you want to learn more, it's in there. And Pat said baby food jars are great for borage flowers. Yeah, that is a great idea. And for things like seeds, baby food jars would be great as well. Or like the little jelly jars, the mason jelly jars. But I will tell you, if you start buying jars, it's going to become a huge investment. But maybe some of you are canners and you already have a bunch. Okay, so bags. Some people I know do store things in paper bags, like the big paper grocery bags, and that can be okay. Just know it's not going to preserve things as long. So if you have some herbs that either you don't have a lot of, or you know you're going to go through in a year, and you have a very dry place to store them, then I would totally go ahead and do paper bags, because you can stack them. They don't take up lots of room, and it makes things a lot easier oftentimes. So plastic bags like this picture right here are doable. I will say things like Ziplocs are going to be really easy to obtain and easy to store. However, they are somewhat porous. So just keep that in mind. They're not going to be completely airtight. So they may not preserve what you are harvesting for quite as long. Okay, so that is bags. What's next? Oh, other kinds of containers. Do y'all have any ideas? Any other containers that you use? I think the baby food jars was a great idea. You can get fancy and do stuff like this. You can get the cool like chalkboard paint and paint that on your jars so that you can use chalk and write on them and then just erase it when you're done and want to put something different in there. I found these really cool at the hardware store. I found these really cool markers that are like dry erase markers, but they're for chalkboards and for glass. So I can write on my mason jars with them or any other kind of jar. And then they erase just like a dry erase marker. So that was pretty cool. I think they're made by Ball Jar. And yeah, any kind of plastic jars or containers can work good. So again, here's a great opportunity to reuse jars that you get for free. Jars, and you can get fancy if you want. You can order them or support your local businesses. So yeah, those are containers. Okay, labeling. This is really important. These are pretty fancy. I like those. You can get labels, and like Avery makes labels. Those are the easiest to find. And they have templates at avery.com, and they're really easy to use, except I will say sometimes for the round ones. Sometimes it's hard to get them to line up perfectly on your printer. But so you can do this. It's a little bit more expensive. You have to pay for the labels, pay for the printer ink. Some people have labeling machines, which are super cool. And there are other things you can use like masking tape or the special tape that you can get specifically for like putting on jars, and it will go in the freezer. So lots of options there. So what to include on your label? Definitely the name of the herb, so the English name or what we call the common name of the herb. You can put the cultivar or variety if that's what you're growing and you know what it is. You can put the botanical name, so the Latin name of the herb, but that is optional. Sometimes it can be helpful though, because sometimes specific species, or usually species, are medicinal in ways that other related species are not. So that can be helpful to know. The date that you harvested it, where the seeds came from. So that can be helpful, right? So maybe you didn't write it down in your journal, or you don't have a journal, then you'll remember where you got those plant seeds from so you can get them again. Or if you're giving it to somebody else, they'll know. Anything else you can think of that you might want to add to those labels? I like to draw pictures on them sometimes that like look like the plant, or put hearts on it, or the moon phase when I harvested it, things like that. Okay. Other kinds of preservation. So, oh, use. Yeah, there is a comment. You could put the use on the label. That is a great idea, especially if you're going to be gifting it to somebody, so that they might have an idea what to do with that herb, or you can just remind yourself. That is a great idea. I think that's Susan. Thanks, Susan. Okay, other kinds of preservation. So this is one of my favorite things to make, And I have some recipes. Actually, I just did this awesome interview on another herbalist podcast called Herbs with Rosalie that you can check out. And it's posted on my website now and all my social media. But I also have recipes for this in my Wild Forage Life cookbook, which is digital. You can get on the Wander School website. But this is probably my favorite herb salt that I make. And this, if you don't know, this amazing plant, it's one of my favorites. It's bee balm. And I infuse it into salt. And there are a wide array of different salts that you can get now and infuse like this. So I pretty much just grind up the herb fresh with the salt. It's really easy, and usually I'll do use a higher ratio of salt to a lower ratio of herb. And I like to do it fresh because the salt pulls the water out of the herb and with it the flavor. So I think that works really well. And yes, to answer your question, the leaves and the flowers, you can add the flowers. Of course, the flowers are around for a much shorter time than the leaves. So if you don't get them in time, then just do the leaves and you'll be fine. But definitely both. And of course, if you throw the flowers in there, it will be extra beautiful. And there are a lot of plants that you could do this with too. So bee balm is sometimes called wild oregano. So it's like having an oregano salt. And I actually like the taste of bee balm even better than oregano. And you could do this with bergamot too, which is a cousin of bee balm. But there are lots of other herbs you could do this with. Oh, and you can make other things we'll talk about in a minute. So you can make infused sugars. Now, of course, this is not in our herb garden, but I do really love pine sugar. And you can do this with pine needles, or you can do it with the cones. And it is quite delicious, but there are a lot of herbs we can grow in the garden that you can infuse into sugar too. So some things I can think of right now are pretty much anything in the mint family. So peppermint or spearmint would be super delicious, or a lot of different cultivars of mint. Like chocolate mint would probably be quite delicious. I haven't tried that, but I would love to. And lemon balm, I think, would be super delicious as well. So I'm sure there's a lot of herbs you can think of besides those that would be great infused into sugar. You don't have to strain them out, but you can if you want to. Well, the cones, the pine cones, you would have to take out, but the other herbs you would not have to. And these are honeys. Cool, whatever language this is in. Russian, maybe Arabic. I'm not sure. Not Arabic, Russian. I think maybe some of y'all know. How do you infuse into the sugar? It's pretty much the same as the salt, depending. I mean, if you use pine cones, you would just cover the pine cones with sugar in a jar. But if you're working with herbs, then you would do the same as the salt, and you would just grind them up like in a clean coffee grinder, or I actually have an herb grinder. Cuisinart brand makes one that is pretty reasonably priced. You could also put it into a food processor. So these are infused honeys, and again we have some pine needles, also some lavender, which would be delicious. I have been experimenting the last couple years with infused honeys with flowers, and they are so delicious. So you can infuse the herb, the leaves, some of the stems, and or the flowers, and it is quite lovely. There are a lot of things you can forage and add in, but especially things from the garden. The trick with these is that you're going to want to definitely not pick them when they're wet. Pick them when they're dry and then leave them out for the moisture to evaporate for about 8 hours or so. And I do have recipes for these in the Herbal Handbook for Homesteaders as well. And some weeds that grow in or around your garden are great for this as well. I love violet infused honey. Goldenrod infused honey is really nice, and that's a great one to grow. So lots of options there as well. You don't have to strain them out, but you can, and they're quite delicious. Just those honeys mixed into tea or put on toast. So it's pretty great. Okay, and then there's spice blends. This is one of my favorite things to do that I need to do more of. But this picture is of a spice blend, which is really popular in the Mediterranean. It's called Za'atar. I have a blend in the Wild Forage Life cookbook on the website, on my website. And what I put in it is sumac, wild sumac berries, nettle, either stinging nettle or wood nettle, and bee balm. You could put oregano in there as well. But some people will put mince in there. So there's a whole range of options of what you can add into Za'atar. And it's really fun just to try your own spice blends as well. You can find all kinds of blend ideas online too. Just search what other people are doing and you'll get some great ideas. You could mix like salts and peppers together and then throw herbs in there. You could put like, I don't know, just there's so many options here. So like oregano and salt and pepper. Yeah, there's and mix like multiple different herbs in there. So like thyme and oregano, you can make your own Italian spice blend. There's a question, which type of sumac? I will do usually smooth sumac, but you could do the staghorn sumac. You would probably want to like use some kind of screen and rub the sumac on there to get off some of the fuzziness. But I feel like smooth sumac is the easiest. The winged sumac is nice as well. Of course, we wouldn't want to do poison sumac, but for those of you who don't know, poison sumac has white berries, so any of the red sumac berries are safe. So there's spice blends. And I just feel like the sky's the limit on those. You can come up with so many fun spice blends. Okay, so oils are also super fun. And we do want to be really careful with oils as well, that our herbs are relatively dry, if not completely dry. I would honestly recommend to dry your herbs all the way before you put them into oil, because if they're wet, they can make your oil go rancid, and that would be really sad. So we don't want to do that. But there are all different kinds of oils that you could infuse herbs into, and all different kinds of herbs that you could infuse into oil. So here's some ideas here, like peppers, hot peppers, rosemary is really delightful. Again, thyme and oregano or a mix of all of those. Garlic is great. And you can do a mix of all of those, and you can leave them in the jar and use a pretty jar like this, and they make wonderful gifts for the holiday season or birthdays, housewarmings, and they're quite beautiful, and you don't have to strain them out. You can also blend your oils with vinegar and make a vinaigrette. You can put those oils on all kinds of things, on salads, on cooked greens is really nice. So they're, and then bread dip is really nice for that as well. And then vinegars, you can also infuse herbs into vinegar. So I grow mugwort in my garden, and I've really enjoyed infusing mugwort into vinegar. Um, but there's a lot of options of what you can infuse, and you can infuse berries into vinegar. I don't usually infuse things into white vinegar just because I don't really like consuming white vinegar. But there are a lot of really wonderful options. There are a lot of really cool different vinegars that you can infuse herbs into. So I encourage you to explore, but I feel like apple cider vinegar is the most accessible. You can get it in gallon jugs. It's not very expensive. So, and I have recipes for that as well in the Herbal Handbook for Homesteaders. So, um,
Abby, we are at 7:50.
okay, cool. Well, I think this is my last educational slide, and then I just have my contact info. So I just wanted to put in here ferments. This is some beautiful lotus ferments and some burdock root ferments and some other yummy stuff in here. So I just want to encourage you to think about that. And yeah, we were talking before we even started about pesto and freezing pesto in ice cube trays. So there are so many options here for preservation. So I just encourage you to explore and think about what all you can do. Here are all of my contacts. And if you want, I can send you this slideshow and then those will be clickable. But you can, I guess I'll just, I can put this in the chat, but if you go to patreon.com/thewanderschool, you can find us there, and that's a place where you can support the work that we do with the nonprofit to get herbs to underserved communities. We work a lot with tribal communities right now, and you can also get all kinds of cool ongoing herbal education. There's the Wander School YouTube channel, Instagram page, Facebook page. You can get my books on thewonderschool.com. And I do, if you want to come out this way to the Asheville area, I have a plant walk on the 23rd of September, and that's going to be in Candler, which is just outside of Asheville. And you can register for that on my website. Something really exciting that's happening is a virtual botany course for foragers, herbalists, gardeners, everyone. And I also do, if you ever want to bring me out, I do offer botanical property surveys. So it's kind of like a private plant walk on your land. And yes, if you would like to volunteer, you definitely can send me a message. I always need volunteers for a wide range of things, my board especially, and coming and processing the herbs, helping distribute. You can make donations monetarily on the website or donations of herbs and herbal medicine. So there's lots of room for those things, and gardening help as well. We do go out to Cherokee and work in the garden with the Cherokee tribal members. So really cool stuff happening. Okay, I'm willing to stay for a little bit and answer more questions if anyone has them. Oh, I see one. Please expand on why not wash herbs between birds visiting my herb box and pollution. How do we know that they are not contaminated? That's a good question. Usually I feel like if you don't see bird poop on them, then they're okay. Pollution is a good one. I don't know how much of it you're going to get off with washing, but you'll probably get some off. And that is just a tough one. My main concern is if you're not using any heat to dry your herbs, there's a very good chance that they will mold. Um, if you have access to a dehydrator, then it's fine. Some people will put them in their oven on the lowest possible setting. They still might get a little too cooked. If you have a gas stove, however, you can just leave the pilot light on and not turn the heat on, and that will dry them. Some people will, if they have an electric stove, just leave the light on. It might eventually burn out your light in your stove, in your oven, but it gives just a little bit of heat, so that might be an option. But I can understand why that might be a concern. So we got to do what we got to do. That's a good question too. Thanks, Patricia.
What about bay leaves? I know that's not a native thing, or I'm not going to find it in my woods, but I happen to have a live bay tree that's,
Yeah.
I mean, I've had it for years now, and it looks like it needs to be picked. And bay leaves are so expensive. I feel like I should take advantage of this thing.
I definitely would. I love bay. I harvest wild bay when I go down south to like Charleston and Savannah area. Um, so yeah, I would definitely harvest them, and you can definitely substitute them for bay leaves in all kinds of things. I'll throw them into my soups and stews and my um, broths and things like that when I'm making them. So yeah, I put them in tea too. I think they're delicious.
So do you just cut the leaf off and let it dry? I mean, like,
Yep.
it's pretty
Yeah, and they're
straightforward. I've
all
just not done it.
Yeah, they're really nice because they're already pretty dry, so it doesn't take much to dry them. You can just leave them out most of the time on a countertop or table or in a basket, and they dry really easily. And then I just throw them in a plastic bag, put them in the cabinet or a jar, and yeah, it's really easy, and you usually don't need very many of them for whatever you're making, so they go a long way.
Do we have any more questions?
I have one. This is okay. Thank you so much. This was great. Have you noticed any of the herbs? It's kind of out of the topic, but any of the herbs serving as a pest deterrent?
Mm.
My herbal garden didn't get affected by what was it? I sent you a picture, Christian. Is it the eastern leaf? Whatever that bug was.
Oh, the leaf-footed bug, yeah?
Yeah, that ate my elderberry, ate my all the fava beans and chickpeas and everything, but none of them got to my herb garden. Everything was great in my garden, but I can't figure out which herb actually worked on them.
Yeah,
What was the pest control
Yeah.
herb?
yeah. I feel like usually very aromatic herbs, especially mint family herbs.
Mhm.
Um, but Christina might have some other ideas.
That's one of the reasons I plant my stuff together, like
Mhm.
What I'll
all
do next year.
beside each other. Yeah, kind of
Yeah.
inter herbs and vegetables. But yeah, I'll bet basil and mint, those are going to be your best ones. But
Yeah,
lavender
and
maybe too.
yeah, there's some good websites and books out there on companion planting. So you might look that up specifically because some yeah, some herbs are more specific to certain plants, and then some plants are just have good effects on other plants and they're growing. So there are some good resources out there.
Okay,
I'm
thank you.
just surprised anything ate elderberry. I
I
thought,
know, I was kind of surprised too.
It
she
didn't
has a strange pocket down there where she lives. It's weird things happen in her yard.
didn't eat the leaves. It just ate the berries as soon as the flowers turned to berries. That they were gone.
Oh, that was probably birds.
No, I have caught them in action. Well, there
Oh,
were
wow.
some birds too, but they were all over it, like they covered the berry bush.
Oh, crazy. I've never seen that before.
Rock Hill, South Carolina. I'm telling you, it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people will put bird netting over their elderberries. That probably wouldn't stop bugs, but maybe like a finer cloth over them could maybe keep out some of the bugs.
Yeah, I might do that next year. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions? Gosh, they're so quiet.
I know they are very quiet.
Well, I have them muted. That's probably why. But they can undo that. Well, I think that's it. And thank you so much. This was really informative. Now I feel like I need to go get to work. That's how this
Right?
always is at the end of these. I need to go do some things now.
I know I
Yeah,
want to try.
definitely.
I
And
need
I
to
want to
go
try the
water some things
salts.
so that there's things that I can actually harvest, right?
yeah, I would say two little tips just to leave y'all with is one, when you harvest, plan ahead. So make sure you have time to process those things.
Exactly.
Even if it's just laying them out where they have room for the air to circulate. Because it really stinks if you harvest a whole bunch of something from your garden and then you don't have time to process it. And you're like, oh, I'll get to that later. But then you don't, you forget, and it's just ruined and it rots. And the other thing I would say is be gentle on yourself and don't try to do too much. And also don't be too hard on yourself if not everything in the garden gets preserved, because inevitably that will happen and there's always next year. So just do your best.
Yes,
Get some
I've been
help.
doing that forever.
That's good to know. For the
Yeah.
salts and the sugars,
Mhm.
do you dry the plants completely till they're actually dried, or do you put them in dry but fresh?
I don't actually dry them at all. I put them in fresh. You can put them in dry, and honestly, I haven't done a lot with sugars just because I don't tend to eat a lot of sugar myself, but um, I have been wanting to experiment with things like coconut sugar though. But definitely, I don't know if it's as good as at pulling moisture out as the salt is. So that would be something to experiment with. I have done it with things like pine needles, which are already pretty dry. But for salt, for sure, I prefer fresh herbs. You can definitely infuse dry herbs, but I feel like the flavor will be stronger with fresh herbs because it's pulling the moisture out of the plant and the phytochemicals with it. So you get more of the flavor that way.
Okay. And then the pine needles are edible, so you can throw those in salt and
Yeah, you can. I mean, I have a friend of mine who's a Menominee herbalist, Cindy Quay. She's awesome. We teach together sometimes, and she says that they believe in her community that you shouldn't eat the pine needles, that they can hurt your stomach. So I try not to eat a lot of them. And you could definitely strain them out with some kind of mesh strainer.
okay.
You don't have to eat them.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this a lot.
You are very welcome. And thanks everybody for your compliments in the chat. I appreciate it.
We're nice people.
Yeah, they seem like it. Thanks everybody for being here.
Yeah, thank you for doing this, Abby. This was great, and I will try to get it posted probably by Monday, and I will shoot you the link so you'll have it. And thanks again. Now we need to go out there and get to work.
That's right. You're very
That's right.
welcome. Everybody, feel free to reach out to me as well.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Okay. Thank you.
You're
Good night,
welcome.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.